Vaishali Joshi, also from the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. Welcome to Goa. Good evening, Goa, and you wonderful people. I, Vaishali Joshi, the Ehsaas Woman of Goa, welcome you all to a very special evening of the Right Circle. The Right Circle, I think somebody was asking me earlier, is a platform which is organized by the Prabha Khaitan Foundation under many of its literature initiatives. It is birthed to bring together authors and readership of English literature and language in a close, engaging and informal setting. The sessions are structured around the life and the works of the author, followed by an interaction with the audience. The Right Circle started its journey from Jaipur and has now conducted sessions across India and even overseas in Oxford, Birmingham, New York and Oslo. Today's event is in collaboration with Cidade, Goa. We have Mr. Anmol and Ms. Eva Kapoor here. Media partner Lokmat. We also have our media partner Lokmat over here. And the tireless support of the Ehsaas Women of Goa. Today we have a very special personality with us. This is Stephen Alter. But before we get into the conversation and the most awaited part of the evening, I would like to share a little bit about the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. It may be repetitive for some of you who regularly attend our functions, but the raison d'etre of this evening is the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. So I would definitely like to introduce the foundation. It's a non-profitable trust committed to humanitarian and socio-cultural causes. Late Dr. Prabha Khaitan established it as a charitable trust in the early 1980s. Based in Kolkata, it is committed to supporting women's empowerment, gender equality, literature, culture, children's welfare, social causes, arts, and the performing arts. Late Dr. Prabha Khaitan was an eminent Indian literature, philanthropist, social worker, entrepreneur, and a feminist who established the foundation, and she is embodied in her famous words, Karm hi Jeevan hai, work is life. Charting a glorious 40-year-old journey, the foundation has gone only from strength to strength by launching many initiatives to further the cause that Dr. Khaitan had envisaged. The Prabha Khaitan Foundation organizes authors' meets, book launches, literature fests, panel discussions, boutique festivals, and events of performing arts. The foundation curates the best of events to widen the spectrum of languages and literature, be it English, Hindi, or regional. Authors and artists connect with their niche audience through diversified events like Kalam, Kitab, Ek Mulaqat, Tet Ati, Akhar, Labz, Sur aur Saaz, Muskan, Rahat, Karuna, and so on, which divaricate from his ingenious pillars. To create awareness in the community, we uphold one pressing social cause every month. We are elated to share that the 3-time Grammy winner, Ricky Cage, the man behind the signature collar tune of the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, curates our music for the month, and that is what we have on our video invite. I'm sure those of you who have listened to the video invite must have enjoyed the music, and that's done by the Grammy Award-winning Ricky Cage. Now the man of the moment. Mr. Stephen Alter is a celebrated author and a naturalist known for his extensive work on the Indian Himalayas and broader natural history. Born in Mussoorie, India in 1956 to American missionary parents, he has spent much of his life immersed in the Himalayan region and has deep ties to Landur and Mussoorie communities. He is an author of over 20 books spanning fiction and non-fiction, and notable among them being Birdwatching, which won the 2022 Green Book of the Year, Wild Himalaya, the Banff Mountain Book Award and the Keku Naroji Award, and Becoming a Mountain, the Keku Naroji Award. His most recent novel is Death in Shambles, a hill station mystery, in 2023, and his latest non-fiction is The Cobra's Gaze, exploring India's wild heritage. We're not going to reveal the name of the book that we just have over here with us. That's going to be a little bit of a suspense. Stephen grew up in Missouri and was educated at Woodstock School and Wesleyan University. He has a long-standing connection to Woodstock School, where his family served as staff and principals. He has taught creative writing at the American University in Cairo. 7 years he was a director of the writing program and as a writer in residence at the MIT for 10 years. Stephen has received prestigious fellowships including Guggenheim, Fulbright, East-West Center from Hawaii, and the Banff Center for Mountain Culture. He is a founding director of the Missouri Writers Mountain Festival, which brought authors, mountaineers, and artists to the region from 2005 to 2015. Stephen is married to Amita Law Alter, a potter and designer, and they have 2 children, Jayan, who works for Patagonia, and Shibani, a film production supervisor. Stephen divides his time between his homes in Missouri, Goa, and Colorado, USA. So we have a very, very illustrious person who's got a lot of exposure to the world and who has done multiple things. So can we have a huge round of applause for Mr. Stephen Alter? And we're extremely grateful that you've accepted our invitation to be here this evening. And we have this audience who's just waiting to connect with you. In conversation with Mr. Stephen Alter, we have our very own Ehsaas Woman of Goa, Shruti Juwarkar. A self-made entrepreneur and mother of 2. She is a passionate advocate for self-improvement and cultural preservation. Born in the vibrant city of Varanasi and now based in Goa, she brings Varanasi weaves to the global stage as the founder and CEO of Girasta Couture OPC Private Limited. Since 2016, she has championed sustainability through her apparel brand Rouge Serve. Representing the Prabha Khaitan Foundation in Goa, she promotes Indian art and culture as a part of the Ehsaas Women of Goa initiative. I'd now like to invite Mr. Stephen Alter and Shruti Juwarkar to please come and take center stage.
So thank you so much Vaishali for such a warm introduction. And before I start with the interview, and you have already given a very illustrated information about who is he, and so when we heard about that we're going to interview you, I had to stop you because there was, by the way, with so many achievements and so many, more than 20 books that he has written, he is not on social media. So my stalking journey was very, very, very difficult. So with very limited, so the AI helped a lot. ChatGPT and Perplexity and everything that I could get my hands on, and I was googling every different part of him. So the first thing that anytime I meet a person, I want to know about the family, because I feel that your family is a lot of background that gives you. So I was trying to find out his kids and his wife, or what is it like. So I even messaged a Woodstock alma mater that, hey, I'm going to interview this guy. Do you know anything about him that I can probably pop in the interview? So first my impression was that, my God, 20 books and a wife and 2 kids, how is that even possible? He must be someone who would be totally immersed in his library, and poor wife would be taking all the load of raising the kids, and I was like, men, I was just cursing him in the background, to be honest. But then I saw his interviews and he was so generous. He spoke about his wife so fondly in every interview, and she's a part of the interviews as much as, and also the books. And I felt that it's some sort of, knocking on my door that, you can have it all. I have been thinking about this for a very long time, that is it possible to have it all in this world today? Family, kids, work and everything, and here you were in front of me who I was going to interview, and I was like, I need to grab the most of this opportunity and get the story out of him. How did he do it all while raising a family, while having a loving relationship with his wife, and moving spaces, because like you said, you've moved Colorado, India, US, and you have shifted 10 years back, he moved to Goa for good. So that's my first question. That can we have it all? And if yes, then what is the secret?
Well, is this working?
No, I think it's not on.
Good. Well, thank you, Shruti, and my thanks to the Prabha Khaitan Foundation for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure. I did an event for the foundation in Kolkata about 6 years ago, and it's very nice to be back under the auspices of the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. So thank you very much. Well, I think the first response to your question is I don't think I have it all. I don't think anybody has it all. And if they do, I suspect they're deluding themselves. To have it all would be, I think, overwhelming. I don't think anybody could deal with that. But I think that, as you say, I've been fortunate in the sense that I've been able to travel a great deal. My family has been extremely supportive of my writing. My children don't read my books, I can tell you that. I mean, they're very supportive, but if you quiz them on what I've written, they'll fail miserably. And my wife reads some of my books, the ones that she likes. There are other ones that she tosses across the room and complains about in that way. But no, I think that all of us, I'm sure that all of you, have balanced your lives in different ways, whether it's the responsibilities of family, whether it's the responsibilities of a profession or a career, and then your own personal interests in that way. And I think that, I suppose I've been fortunate in the sense that none of those have really conflicted. There hasn't been, I don't think at any point have I felt that I had to choose between my family and my work. Being a writer, one of the wonderful things is that you can do it from home. And it's also it's a fairly lonely business, but at the same time, that means that when you're not writing, you look for company, you look for friendship. And teaching, for example, I found to be a very fulfilling counterpoint to writing, because I was able to be in a classroom with a group of young people and interact with them and learn from them, probably more than they learned from me in that way. So you balance things as best you can.
About striking the right balance to what you say and being patient, because he also mentioned that he only took on full-time career as an author after his kids were much older, and he was a full-time educator in the early days when the kids were young and the responsibilities were there. So yeah, maybe that's what I'm going to take back from this interview in my life and probably help balance myself a little more better. So, but I have to ask, with 20 books, was it ever that your characters were finding, your family was finding ways into the characters of your book? Like suppose one argument there and here, and then you write about it as a passage in the book, and then you can get past that negativity, and it was easier. Does it happen a lot?
You mean do my family members find their way into the books?
Into the books, yeah.
I'll warn you right off. I'm a little bit deaf, so if she asks a question and I give the wrong answer, or I apologize in advance. Hopefully my answer will be of some interest, even if I don't answer your questions. I apologize in that way. But I think that as a writer, you are constantly scavenging for characters, situations, stories, settings in that way. And so when you live with people closely, they will in some way get themselves into your fiction, particularly. I try to avoid writing about my family, particularly my children and my wife, because I think they deserve a certain level of privacy that I owe them in that process. But nevertheless, I think that they find their way into some of the characters that I develop. And as a fiction writer, when you're developing a sort of community of characters. What you're doing is stealing from people that you've met. Somebody said something that sticks in your mind and you use it. Somebody looks a particular way or dresses a particular way or behaves in a particular way, and that becomes a part of the other characters. I don't think I've ever written about a particular person that I knew as that person. It's usually a composite. You put together bits and pieces of other people, and then they become that fictional character that's there. And I think the other thing that I would say is, I think every character that a writer imagines in a book has a little bit of himself or herself in it. And I think that there's no way you can make that character come alive unless you put something of yourself in that. And when I would say this to my students, my writing students, they would say, but you know, I'm writing about such an awful character. I mean, he's such a villain, he's so cruel and you know, despicable. How can I put something of myself in there? Well, I say, draw on that part of yourself that is awful and despicable. And they will say, no, there's nothing about me that's that. Well, I'll admit it, there are awful things about me. There are terrible secrets that I have hidden away, and I draw on those to create even the most unpleasant characters that I put into my books in that way. So you're constantly borrowing, you're constantly stealing, scavenging, taking elements from films even that you watch or other books that I read. I think writers are, in a sense, hunter-gatherers. We go out and search for our characters in the world, and then sit at our desks and try and piece them together as best we can.
So next time you're reading your book and there's something awfully wrong, we'll try to imagine, was it you or was it just an imagination?
I'll confess.
Yeah. So, like you said, we all know that you've been born and brought up here, and you mentioned that your father was also born and brought up here. I didn't know that. So, what was it like growing up, and how was writing a part of your, growing up? Or did you always think you would be a writer? What did you aspire to be when you were growing up? What was it like growing up in India, which was going through so much, and it's still going through so much, but back then it was a war of existence basically. So how was it, if you could elaborate a little bit about on your background, how it was?
Sure. Well, as you said, I was born in India and grew up here. I traveled to the US a couple of times when I was in school with my parents, and only really went back to the US when I went to university. And I hated it in the US. I was miserably homesick. And so I finished university as quickly as I came straight back to India. And it's been my home all along, though we have lived in Egypt for about 7 years and in Boston. When you ask at what point did I think I might become a writer or a storyteller, let's say a storyteller in that way, I think one of the things that I was forced to do early on was explain myself. Because people would look at me and they'd say, well, where are you from? And that's a loaded question. If I ask you, where are you from? You might say Patna, but you have so much more to you than there is in just that single place in that way. So as a white person growing up in India, I was constantly having to explain who I was, why I was here, what I was doing. And then when I traveled to the United States for college, if I tried to explain to people that I was actually born in India and my family has been there for almost 100 years and all of this, then I was asked all kinds of other questions that I had to answer as well. So in a sense, I was telling my own story each of those times. And I'll be honest with you, I often made up things because it was much easier to just lie about my background than to actually get into all of the details, where it became complicated in that way. And sometimes in college someone would say, "Where are you from?" and I would simply say Boston. And then the conversation ended at that point. And that was very convenient sometimes. But my storytelling really, I think, in many ways comes out of a sense of my own identity and explaining my own identity in that way.
It all starts when you're young, and that's it. So when did you actually think that you would want to become an author, like a writer? Did it dawn upon you that I want to do this for good, like for a living, or it's just that you wrote one book and then you said that let's give it a thought?
Well, I think when I was in high school, I certainly wanted to be a writer. I thought I would be a poet, because my cousin was a poet, my mother was a poet, and I thought poetry is definitely what I want to do. And I enjoy reading poetry. I still read a lot of poetry. But when I went to university, one of the first classes I took was in poetry writing with a very well-known American poet, Richard Wilbur. And he started the class by saying, "I'm not going to teach you how to write poetry," but he said, "This class will determine whether you ever write poetry again or not." And I didn't write poetry after that. I turned to prose. And I realized that for me, the discipline and the level of, precision that a poet requires was not for me. I'm better at writing something that's 200 pages long rather than something that's 2 lines long in that way. So it started in high school, but when I went to university, then I had other professors who were professional novelists, and they inspired me. And in fact, I wrote my first novel when I was in college. So I was 18, 19 at that point. And when I finished that novel, I was just about finished with university. So when I traveled back to India, in those days there was no email or any of these things. So I took my manuscript and I landed in London, and there was a literary agent that I had been introduced to by one of my professors, and I went to his office and gave him the manuscript. And then came back to India. And when I got back a few weeks later, there was a telegram, and he said, "I'll represent you." And then a few weeks later, there was a telegram that said, "Andre Deutsch publishers have accepted your novel and it'll be published." So I tell my student that I wrote my books on a manual typewriter, and I received word that they would be published through a telegram, and none of you, my students, have a clue what either of those things is. But I was very fortunate that I was able to publish my first novel, Neglected Lives, straight out of college. And I thought, now I'm a writer, I can, parade around like a writer. And then I realized that in fact, every book is harder to sell than the one previous to that. And so it was very easy to begin with, or I was very lucky. But since then, it's been a challenge. Every book I have, this book or the last book, I have to persuade somebody to publish it. It's not that they automatically be published. And there are books that I've written that I've had to just put aside because nobody was interested in that. So it's been an interesting journey. It did begin in high school, but college was really where I made up my mind that that's what I wanted to do.
It's amazing. So, by the way, when that telegram happened and he got that final offer, he got also the money that he got, he put that money straight into buying his first bullet. And so he's a biker as well, and he rides quite a distance, which we will take up some other time maybe. Because let's talk about your book, The Greatest Game, that we're going to talk about majorly today. So, in The Greatest Game, you have traveled through Scotland, retracing the girls' roots. Was there ever a moment or a story that you uncovered during the research that surprised you the most? And maybe that you did not mention in the book, because I don't want the audience to take away from the surprise that they're gonna once they read it. But probably a research that you came across that you surprised you the most, and you didn't mention in the book?
Well, this was a book that I suppose I should have written maybe about 20, 30 years ago, because it's a retelling or a sequel to Rudyard Kipling's Kim, which is a sort of classic of Indian colonial writing. And the character Kim is quite close, in a sense, to my own experiences, because he is a young Irish orphan who grows up on the streets of Lahore and pretends to be Indian. He can pass himself off as an Indian, and he, of course, speaks the language, the Punjabi, the Urdu, the Hindustani of Lahore. And so as a character, he interested me because he could put on disguises, he could put on masks. All of us put on masks. And throughout my life, I've been putting on various masks in that way. And so he, as a character, interested me. But the truth was, the book itself, Kim, was not a book that I actually enjoyed reading when I had to read it in school. It was assigned to us, and I thought, this is not... In fact, I don't think I actually read the entire book. So only a couple of years ago did I go back to it and read it carefully and appreciate the character himself, but also the context within which it was written. And one of the things that, you were asking some of the things that I didn't put into the book. It's set in 1947, from about March 1947 to just after August 15th, just probably right about now in 1947. So that's the span of time. And I think one of the things that, as I was researching it, what was fascinating was how quickly independence and partition actually happened. Mountbatten, we think of Mountbatten as being in India for an extended period of time. He actually only arrived in March 1947. Independence was supposed to be in 1948, but the British rushed it through in 1947 rather than 48, and everything was happening at once. And one of the, I write about it a little bit in the book, but what intrigued me particularly was, at the time of independence, nobody knew where the lines were actually going to be drawn between India and Pakistan. They had a general sense, but for instance, people in the town of Firozpur, which is right on the border, they thought they were going to be in Pakistan, and then suddenly they found they were going to be in India, and it was that level of uncertainty. Kashmir, of course, remains an ambiguous part of that whole equation, but at that time, nobody knew where the lines would be drawn. And for me, what was interesting, and as I started working on this book, was what would someone like Kim, born of Irish parents, without any family now, who grew up on the streets of Lahore, where would he go at the time of partition? He's not going to go back to the UK, because he's never been there. So what is he going to choose? And so part of the book explores that question, because he has allegiances that are on both sides of the border that we know now between Pakistan and India.
My next question was supposed to be that if you could go back in time and play one of the characters, which one would it be? And I'm sure that would be that person, if I'm not wrong. So sure. I'll move to the next question. So the book actually blends history, memoir, and storytelling very beautifully. When you were writing, how did you balance your personal voice with the larger history of yours? And it also captures so much more of the partition and everything. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's one that I faced as I began the book, because Kipling's Kim is told in the third person, so he speaks of Kim with a certain level of detachment as he speaks of the other characters. I chose to write this book in the first person, told from Kim's own point of view. And I think that it wasn't something I thought about a great deal at that time, but I'm glad I did that because it allowed me to speak for him and through him in a way that I think that if I had written it in the third person, it wouldn't have had that immediacy there. The fun part of it for me as a writer was that Kim is changing disguises all along. So at one point he's a Sikh barrister in Lahore, at another point he's a sannyasi in the Himalaya, at another point he's a Punjabi merchant coming by train with his family to Delhi from Lahore as a refugee. And at each point, of course, it's Kim telling the story, but he is a different person in disguise. And that, I think, for me, was interesting because he changes perspective as he goes along. Of course, at the end of the day, the most difficult disguise for him is to play an upper crust Englishman, which he might look English, but for him that was perhaps an even bigger challenge than some of these other roles that he played.
So, if like we have discussed, like Vaishali mentioned, he has so many traits of himself, and he also he's written fiction books, and he's written the books on ecology and the environment, and the kids book and the adult kids book as well. So, and when I was reading about him, I also learned about an incident that really altered a lot of things about their life and how they feel. And he also wrote a book called as Becoming the Mountain. So they were in Missouri, and they were brutally attacked by some robbers, and he and his wife, the kids were gone at that time and to their respective careers, but then they both were there, and they were really severely injured, and they were robbed at their home where they have always lived. So Stephen, I want to know that how, like obviously you have written a lot about it in the book, but for the audience today that is present, if you can, and also the justice was not served. So how is it to live with something for which the justice is not served, and how do you heal from something like that? Does it live with you forever?
Well, yes, I think it's something that you carry with you. I don't think it's something that I'll ever forget. I mean, it was very violent, very brutal, and I mean, both of us were traumatized by it afterwards. It was something that I think in the immediate aftermath there was a sense of alienation, fear, wanting to leave Missouri. I mean, because Missouri is not a place where you often think of people attacking you with knives and stabbing, excuse me, stabbing you, and you know, that sort of violent crime is not something that Missouri is known for. So the immediate impulse was to run away in that way. But then at a certain point, as we recovered, I think certainly I, and to a certain extent my wife, also felt that if we leave, in a sense, we're defeated by that particular encounter. And instead, I think we had a conviction that we would remain in Missouri and pick up our lives again in that way. As a writer, it was an interesting problem, I guess would be the best way to put it, in the sense that as we recovered from that attack, and I was in the hospital for, 15 days, and I couldn't walk for about a month or so. And so we were having visitors coming to see us, friends, family, strangers would arrive. And in each case, I would have to tell them what happened. And that, in a sense, was a form of therapy, in a sense, because you repeat the story. The story gets better and better each time you tell it. But,
Can we know the
sorry?
We don't know the story. Maybe you should elaborate on what you
I know I'm keeping you in suspense. You have to read Becoming a Mountain, then you'll. No, I'll tell you very briefly what it is. But basically, as I was telling that story, I realized that there would be a book coming out of it, in the sense, because on a very wet, foggy monsoon morning in July, at 5 o'clock in the morning, that somebody knocked on the door, and my wife got up to answer it, and 4 men pushed their way into the house and tied us up, stabbed us multiple times, asking for money and things which we didn't have. And then after about, it felt like an hour, but it was probably more like 15 minutes, then they left us tied up and bleeding in the house. And fortunately, I was able to get up and get outside and call for help, and then we went to the hospital. We're taken to the hospital and sewed up, and here we are. But basically, that story that I've told you in about 60 seconds is the story that begins this book, Becoming a Mountain. And as I healed and as I was able to walk again, physically, it took at least a month before I could really walk. One of the first goals I set for myself was to climb a hill near our home called Flag Hill, which is about 20 minutes walk from the house. And I was able very, very slowly to climb to the top of that hill. So once I got there, then I thought to myself, well, and you look out on the higher Himalaya, I thought, well, now I'm going to set a further goal. And the book really is more about, it begins with the attack, but it's more about those journeys back into the mountains. One of the journeys I took was to Kailash in Tibet, and I did the parikrama, or the Kora of Kailash. I also did a series of treks to approaching Nanda Devi, not trying to climb it, but approaching Nanda Devi. And then I tried to climb a mountain called Bandapunj, which is directly behind our home in Missouri. And it's a mountain, it's a sort of iconic mountain behind us. And I failed miserably. Well, I failed twice. I failed twice to climb Bandapunj. And that failure, in a sense, was also part of the story. In a sense, realizing that mountain climbing, though I admire mountaineers, is probably the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. Because you're up there on ice and snow with 1,000 feet below you, and you think to yourself, why am I doing this at this particular moment? But all of that is part of that book, and it comes out of that violent incident, but the healing process, the journey of healing that took me to different parts of the Himalaya, in a sense reaffirmed that the Himalaya were my home, and this is where I belonged.
Well, on a lighter note, I do feel like I'm in Himalayas right now. It's so cold right now. So I don't know if everybody else is also feeling like
Would you like the AC to be
that. Thank you. Thank you.
Just, excuse me, just make it a little warmer,
So,
please. Yeah.
I'll take the question to your next book, The Cobra's Gaze. I mean, that's about preservation and about how India's landscapes are changing. So, and there are a few environmentalists here as well who would kill me if I don't ask anything about environment and go on just about you. So the book often shows the tensions between the reverence for wildlife and the human fear of it. Do you feel your story telling about animals changes the way you actually treat them?
Could you repeat the last part of that? I missed.
Do you feel that your storytelling changes your view about the animals, like the way you actually treat them, and how you actually view them?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I've written about in a couple of my books, in several of my books, is the idea that we often think of ourselves as a species apart, that we're above other species on Earth. But in fact, we are just one of millions of species of life forms that are here on Earth. And that relationship between our species and other species is something that is fraught. It's something that sometimes there's a great deal of affection between species, not just human species, but to other species, mammals or whatever it may be. But how we look at other animals and how we perceive them, whether we are scientists, whether we are devotees of a particular faith that deifies that particular species. If it's a cobra is deified in many, many traditions. And what is it about that species that makes us believe that it is sacred in that way? Those sort of questions fascinate me a great deal. And I found that one of the ideas that actually came to me while I was working on a book called Wild Himalaya, which preceded The Cobra's Gaze, was this idea that at the heart of most faiths and most religions, I'm myself a non-believer, but I'm fascinated by sacred gestures, sacred landscapes, sacred traditions and mythology. One of the things that I found in the mountains was, many of these mountains, whether it was Kailash or Nanda Devi or even Bandapunj, they are considered sacred mountains. Why? Why is that? And to me, the answer that I came up with for myself was that when you're standing in the mountains looking at Nanda Devi or whatever peak you're looking at, it is awe-inspiring. I mean, it is spectacularly beautiful. It is something that moves you emotionally, and it's a very powerful presence. But at the same time, when you look down below your feet, where your boots are standing at the edge of the cliff, it drops away 1,000 feet, and you're absolutely terrified. And it is that combination of awe and terror that I think lies at the heart of most religious experience. That when we see a deity or when we hear the stories of a particular faith, whichever faith it may be, I think there is that sense of being awestruck, but also being, to a certain extent, terrified. Now, when I started working on The Cobra's Gaze, I was struck by cobras because most of us are a little bit frightened of cobras. Most of it, even if we don't admit it, we are. But what is it that makes so many people put cobra images in a temple? Cobras play a part of mythology, whether it's Hindu mythology, Buddhist mythology, Jain mythology. The Naga cults that are there were prevalent throughout India. And wherever you go, whether in Goa, Karnataka, Uttarakhand, wherever you go, you will see images of cobras. And what is it? Why are we so fascinated? And when I actually got an opportunity to see cobras in the wild, and particularly king cobras, which I saw in Agumbe here in Karnataka, there was something spectacularly beautiful about these creatures if you actually looked at them. But there was also something absolutely terrifying about that snake. I mean, the king cobras are 13, 14 feet long, and we were watching them in combat with each other, so we were very close, maybe a meter away from them at the most. And so you're absolutely fascinated, you're awestruck by these creatures, and then at the same time, there's a moment where you think to myself, my God, if this thing bit me, it's all over, there's no escape. So that element of awe and that sense of terror lies at the heart of so many faiths, to use an ambiguous but broad turn in there. And I think that that is something that I recognize both when writing about mountains, but also when writing about wildlife. Tigers are the same. I mean, they're spectacularly beautiful, but they're also terrifying if you're face to face with one. So that relationship, and the book, The Cobra's Gaze, isn't just about that, but that's a key feature that plays out through much of the book.
So while you were saying that, I was just thinking in my mind that probably the only reason I like Kali so much, I'm not a very religious person, but I believe there's a higher power and that you should respect, and who's governing everything. But yeah, probably the only reason I get scared of, I look up to Kali is because that's the only goddess I was scared as a child, because everybody would say that okay, she would kill and slaughter, and rest all the gods were very nice and they could, they were powerful, but they were never scary. So yeah, it's very, very nice way of putting things. And I was going to ask why you put it out as Cobra's Gaze, but yeah, you answered that fairly well.
I actually, when I proposed the book to my publishers, I was thinking I have to have a sort of sexy, saleable title. And so I called it The Cobra's Gaze. And I still remember, I happened to be in London when I'd written the proposal, and I had to get it photocopied. So I went to the shop, a young man who was doing the photocopying, he took it from me and he looked at it and he goes, "Oh, wow." So I thought, okay, this is a good title. The problem after that was that then I had to find cobras, and they're not easy to find. And that was a sort of dilemma for me afterwards. My publishers were quite happy to commission the book, but then I was madly searching for cobras, and I wasn't finding them for a while, and so I was absolutely panicked. I thought I'd have to call it The Mongoose's Gaze, which wasn't going to be as exciting. But anyway, it was a title that came before the book. Fortunately, I was able to see a fair number of cobras and justify the title in that way.
Can I put that out before I close that? So many of the places you described are changing rapidly in the book, and if you were to revisit those landscapes today, what part would that world do you feel might have already been lost or cannot be revisited again?
Writing historical fiction like this and several of my other books are historical novels. The book Birdwatching is set in 1962 when I was, all of 6 years old. So I was able to go back in time and recreate, or try to recreate those landscapes, those places. Delhi in 1960s was a totally different city than it is now. I saw Delhi in the 1960s. I lived in Delhi in the 1980s. So I have a sense of the city in that way. So the fiction allows me to travel back to that point in time, and in a sense erase what has happened since then in that way. But I do write about contemporary settings sometimes, and I think that the change that we're seeing is all part of the story in so many ways, in terms of the society that we live in, as well as the landscape, the physical features of that particular. Take Mussoorie, for example. I've seen it change dramatically in the last 68 years, and I write about that. I comment on that. I complain about it. I sometimes celebrate it, but usually I bemoan the fact that it has changed in ways that I would rather it hadn't in that way.
You've written so many books, and if I had to probably, if you were stuck in one of your books for 1 year, out of the 20 books that you know of, which book would that be and why?
Well, I always, you asked that question very, very delicately, and you didn't ask me the question I often get, which is your favorite book?
Yes.
I appreciate that. But what I usually do is I'll say, well, the last book I wrote is my favorite book.
I already asked
that's the
you.
easy answer for me in that way.
No, but practically, if you could just get stuck in the time frame or the era or the place or what you were writing about, which one would that be? That's why I didn't want to ask you because I can't ask which child is my favorite.
Sure.
So.
Sure. No, well, I think that Birdwatching, which was published about 5 or 6 years ago, was a book that, when you're writing a book, you inhabit that world in so many different ways, through your research, through the writing itself, through the characters that you create. And to me, that was a particularly fascinating period in history, 1962, because of course there was the India-China conflict in the Himalaya, which features in the book. But it was also the height of the Cold War. So not only was the conflict in the Himalaya happening, there was the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy and Khrushchev were, going head to head in that period of time. So it was a very fraught and frightening particular period of time. So as I was reading about that, as I was writing about it, I felt I was sort of taken back to that time, which, as I said, I was only, in 1962, I would have been 6 years old. I was in kindergarten. I don't remember a great deal about that time. I do remember a certain anxiety that my parents were feeling because of the tensions at that time. But this allowed me to go back, and I enjoyed researching that book a great deal. The other book that I thoroughly enjoyed being part of was a non-fiction book, Elephas Maximus, which is a book about the Indian elephant. And this was written, about 25 years ago. And being able to spend time in the company of elephants, both in the wild and in captivity, and then immersing myself in the lore and mythology of elephants in India was a real privilege and a pleasure in that way.
I read, I didn't read, but I did see one of the clip where you were talking about Gajramani, and he said that if I tell a woman that you walk as beautiful as an elephant, she would slap me. But if you see an elephant, the way it walks, it sways and it's so beautiful. So I did remember that it was a very beautiful, semblance that you had drawn between the both. So, but that would be a very terrible time for you to get stuck, maybe because you would want to get stuck because probably you were 6 years old, but as parents I would be hating it because schools would be off and I wouldn't be able to do anything. So is that the time you would really want to get stuck back to, like one of those moments?
Well, I think, I think all of us sort of think back at certain points and say, well, I wish I was born in the 17th century, not in the 21st century or whatever it may be. But if you really think about it, you think to yourself, no, I'm not so sure. I'd probably be dead at 51 or something like that, and better to have lived in the time that I do live. But there's nothing wrong with allowing your imagination to live in that time. And I think as a writer, you have this privilege that you can cast your mind back in time. You can imagine if I was, at Waterloo and I had a sword in my hand, what would I do? Probably run as fast as I could in the other direction. But nevertheless, what would it be like? What would that period of time be like for me? And you can imagine it.
Yes. So if your desk could reveal one secret about Stephen Alter, what would it reveal?
My desk?
Yeah, your writing desk.
That's an easy question. It's an absolute mess. It's chaotic. It's got. No, I go through a process with my desk actually when I'm working on something that I may be working on a particular chapter of the book that requires. I'm doing I just finished a book on the monsoon. It's a short little book, but so I will have all of the material that I've gathered, the books, and they'll be open one on top of the other, and some on the floor, and papers going in all directions. Once I've finished that particular chapter, then I sort of pull it all together and try and tidy up my desk. It never gets tidy. And I myself am not, you can ask my wife and she'll vouch for this, I'm not a very tidy person. But I sort of sort it out to a certain degree before I move on to the next chapter in that way.
But if it is like, and that's the only secret you would say that would be the fastest one. Okay. And is there any story that you're still afraid to tell? And if there is something, even if you don't want to share it right now, what is it that holds you back? Could you share that bit? What is it that holds you back?
Well, I think many things hold us back, and I'm not. When I was younger, I certainly felt invincible and able to do anything, and it didn't matter, and you just sort of said, to hell with it, I'm going to do it. And as you get older, there's a certain point at which you say to yourself, well, maybe that's not such a good idea after all. And so there are things, whether it's physical danger. After our attack, I found that I was much more cautious. I'm not as comfortable trekking on my own as I used to do. I mean, when I was in my 40s, I trekked for days on end, all alone, and it didn't bother me at all. Now when I think about it, I think to myself, that's not a good idea. So there's a physical fear of if I fall down, injure myself, who's going to come and help me? And that didn't used to be something that I thought about. I think that there are also certain risks that we take in relationships, not necessarily close personal relationships, but there are certain points at which I'd be happy to meet. When I was younger, I'd be very happy to meet anybody or get onto a train and start a conversation with anybody in the compartment. As I've grown older, I've become a little bit more reserved in that way. And COVID was, if there was anything good about COVID, it allowed you to wear a mask and hide behind that mask. And sometimes when I'm on a flight now, I'll just wear the mask because then I don't have to have a conversation with whoever's there. So there are things that hold me back now at this particular age that didn't bother me when I was younger. And I don't know whether that answers your question, but it is something that, and it's not so much fear as just a sense of, I'm more comfortable isolating myself from physical danger or from unwanted encounters or unwanted conversations. You're more cautious.
And you're getting your bullet to go up.
Well, yeah, as I told Shruti, motorcycles have been a part of my life for a long time. My first novel I sold for 500 British pounds, and the 500 British pounds went straight into a Royal Enfield bullet. And I've just finished a book that is titled My Last Bullet. And I finally, it wasn't a midlife crisis, it was an end-life crisis. I bought a bullet again recently, and I wanted to drive it to Goa from Missouri. And of course, wiser people have prevailed that I'll ship it to Goa and I'll drive it here, but whatever it may be.
I'm sure they will, I mean, if my husband would have heard it, he would be doing it maybe a billion with you. But yeah, even I would have advised against it. So before, I didn't realize, but the time doesn't permit for more questions. I had a list of them. But before we end the evening, from my side of questions, I have a small rapid fire round lined up for you with some things that, one word I utter and then whatever comes into your mind. The first thing that comes into your mind. I hope that...
Do I get a hamper at the end?
I wish I was Karan Johar, you know. So, no, maybe not. I'm happy being Shruti. But yeah, so shall I?
Sure.
So, the Himalayas.
Home.
Childhood in Missouri.
Great, wonderful, happy.
The perfect writing day.
The perfect writing?
Writing day. Like, what is a perfect writing day?
Perfect writing is engaging.
Okay. A place you escape to when you need inspiration.
My desk, my study.
Your go-to comfort food.
Dal bhat.
Really? Wow. Yeah. A lesson you learned from your parents.
There are a lot of those.
I know.
That's well, patience.
Yeah. The first story or book you remember writing.
Neglected Lives.
Wow. The most challenging part of being an author.
Most challenging part of being an author.
Yeah.
Rejection.
A personal motto or mantra. A personal motto or mantra that you follow. Like.
Forget about it.
A hobby or activity we would be surprised to learn about you.
No surprises. No surprises. You want an activity that would surprise everyone here?
Yeah.
Gosh, now you put me on the spot.
You do get a dokra.
I know, I'm not going to get my hamper. My hamper is... What's an activity that... Now you really put me on the spot.
Your dal bhat surprised all of us.
Yeah.
You could hear people move into that.
Watching Hindi films.
Okay. Then may I ask which one is your favorite?
Well, it depends. I mean, I watched too many at a certain time. There were a lot of films. But I love the ones that come to mind are sometimes inappropriate. Mr. India was Hawaii. I think is one of the most spectacular things. I can tell you the worst films I've ever watched. I think there was a film called Shoved, which in which Sanjay Dutt gets the Booker Prize. Now, if you want to really push the envelope of disbelief, Sanjay Dutt winning the Booker Prize is a real challenge.
It's okay.
It was followed by the other one was Nach, in which Abhishek Bachchan is the interpretive dancer on the streets of Bombay, and it was a dreadful movie. Absolutely dreadful. I mean, I hope nobody's going to take offense on that.
At least, I don't think I will push the envelope because at least you watched the movie Shah because you're an author and maybe you would have found some relevance there. But I don't know why I watched it, and so I'm definitely not pushing any buttons there. Okay, a hobby or activity we would, okay, that is what I asked. Nature is complete, the sentence.
Nature is eternally fascinating.
A fear you have faced and overcome.
Pain.
Something that always makes you laugh.
My daughter.
Oh. One thing
Sometimes not for the right reasons.
One thing you would tell your younger self.
Stick with it.
Okay, and the last one. One thing you wish more people understood about mountains.
That they are constantly changing. Because we think of mountains as being static, but they aren't. They're evolving, they're eroding, they're falling apart.
And some of them are growing also.
And some of them are growing, of course. The Himalaya is certainly growing.
Yeah, I just read that. So thank you so much. And now I would like to open the questions for the floor or for the audience if you have anything to ask about.
Hi, I'm Kaushalika. So I briefly spoken to him. I study animal behavior and welfare. So your books and whatever you just spoke about, your inspirations about books on natural history especially, were really fascinating, and there was a lot to learn. But my question is about writing as a professional. And you are from the age and time when there was a lot of change technologically, and so how did you cope with it? Because I'm really very old school, and even being from '83, I cannot cope with technology. So it's something that's fascinating. Was it frustrating to you, or did you overcome it? Did you gel with it?
The actual process of writing. Yeah, I think the process for me is everything about writing is a process in that sense. And when I speak to my students about it, I joke about the fact that I started writing on a manual typewriter, but the technology has changed. The actual storytelling hasn't necessarily changed. But the important thing, I believe, for anyone who's aspiring to be a writer is to write. Because if you sit around and think about it, you're never going to write anything. You can call yourself a writer in your mind, but until you've actually put words on the page. So when you put something on the page, whatever it might be, that will suggest what happens next. So you might put just a word, and that will then suggest the next word, and pretty soon you have a sentence, and once you have that sentence, it suggests the next sentence, and after a while you have a paragraph, and it builds on that. So that's the process of writing. Now, you may go back and delete those first few sentences and then move on, but until you put something on paper, you're not writing, right? And so that process itself is something that I think is integral to any kind of writing, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, journalism, whatever it might be. You actually have to write. So as I say to the students, I suppose at some point there will be artificial intelligence may get to that point where all you do is you think about it, and the next thing you do is the book is published and it's sitting on your desk. I don't think it's going to happen, but maybe we're moving towards that. I don't think there'll be very good books, to be honest with you. I think they'll be pretty mediocre, but maybe that'll happen.
I'll also mention that when I was talking to him, it read in one of the interviews of his that he writes 1,000 words every day from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. As well. So that's also maybe a part of the process, and probably you can take back.
And how you choose the topics?
Yeah, thank you.
How you choose the topics, like she's saying that?
How do I choose a topic? I only work on one project at a time, but while I'm working on that project, I'm thinking ahead about what's coming next. So usually by the time I finish a book or an article or whatever it is, then the next day I know what I'm going to write next.
Hi, Stephen. This is Amrita. I'm also a writer. I'm based in Goa now. I wanted to ask you the nested questions. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
All right. So the first is about the mountains. There was a moment in our history where that was a grand outpost of the writers. Everybody used to be retreating to the mountains, and there's a whole list of greats who were doing that. For you to move from the mountains to Goa, it is not merely a geographical shift, it is a universe shift in terms of the writing experience. So I wanted to ask you about what that has been like for you. And the second question is the role of community. Like, have you sought other writers in these satellite spaces that you have been living in and working in?
I think it'd be interesting to see what happens as I've spent more and more time in Goa. I haven't written anything about Goa, and I may not, simply because I would only feel confident writing about a place if I really felt I had something fresh to say about it that others haven't said. I lived in Egypt for 7 years, but I never wrote anything about Egypt, simply because I didn't feel comfortable there. So, not comfortable, I didn't feel comfortable writing about that place. So similarly, I'll wait and see. There's a lot more oxygen here than there is in Missouri, so maybe I'll get inspired to write something about it. The second part of your question, in terms of a community, I don't think I've ever consciously sought a community of writers in the sense that, I mean, we joke in Missouri that there are plenty of writers. I mean, every step you take on the mile road, you'll meet a writer, or a would-be writer. But we do get together. I mean, Ruskin, of course, is the sort of godfather there. But there were Bill Aitken, the Gansers, Ganesh Selis there, Sudhir Thaplial. There was a whole variety of, and they were all friends. But we didn't all get together very often. And if we got together, we didn't talk shop. We complained about our publishers. That was the main topic of conversation, if there was anything like that. The point at which I did feel was part of a community of writers was when I was teaching both in Cairo and at MIT, because I was in the writing program. So many of my colleagues were professional writers, and so we would meet on an almost a daily basis, and you'd be talking about what project you were starting or what you were finishing, and there would be a certain amount. And we were also, because we were teaching writing, there was also a certain amount of discussion in terms of how to get across that process to our students. And so there was conversation there. But it's never been something, and I think most writers, maybe I'm wrong in this, but I think most writers live a fairly solitary life, and you meet others from others of your species from time to time, but it's not something I seek in that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello. My name is Ehsaas Woman. I'm an author, healer, and psychic medium. And of course, I do agree with you. We always work in isolation. I think an author is best when they are alone. My question to you is, which book or books do you think contributed to your inner growth, or which transformed you in a way that other books didn't, or anything which would be very inspirational for you to, speak about?
Sure, well, thanks. The first adult book that I call adult in quotation marks was a book by Ernest Hemingway called The Old Man and the Sea, which is a short novella that I remember reading as, gosh, I was probably 10, 12 years old when I read that. And that book influenced me a great deal because, first of all, it's an interesting story. It was about fishing, and there's a great sort of suspense to the story that caught my imagination there. But over the years, what's been interesting is when I started teaching, I taught writing, but I also taught literature in different forms. It was really only when I started teaching some books that I really appreciated them fully. I think as a student, I would read it, or I would skim it, or I would pretend to have read it. But as a teacher, you actually have to read the book. Because you're standing in front of the classroom and you'll make a fool of yourself if you haven't read it. But you also appreciate that text in ways that perhaps you wouldn't if you were just casually reading it. So one of the books that has always, I read it every year, is a translation of Gilgamesh, the Sumerian epic, which is perhaps the first story ever told. It's an ancient epic that was written on clay tablets, and probably before that was an oral tradition. And it has all sorts of spectacular characters and personalities, but it's from, 800 BC or older than that in that way. So that book, as I taught it, was something that had tremendous relevance to me. Particularly, I was teaching it in Egypt for the first time during the Iraq War, and it's set in a country called Uruk, in which there is a king who's a tyrant to his people. And the parallels between that story, Saddam Hussein, who was still in power at that point, all of those things meant a great deal to me. And it's a book that I go back to again. Just to give you a few other titles, V.S. Naipaul's books fascinate me, both his fiction and non-fiction. And I think as a writer, he's unmatched. As an individual, as a personality, he was very difficult and cranky, but his writing is spectacular in that way. But it's a wide range of books.
Last question.
Yeah.
Take one last question. Yeah.
So I am Namita Sharan. I am an editor and publisher of Goa Samachar. Sir, you have cleared that bhat dal is your favorite food. You are more comfortable with bhat dal. Can you suggest? Can you say something about like which Indian food goes well with wine and rum, because you have some European influence also. And as an author, do you think that after 10:30 writers work well at night?
After
10:30. 10:30 or 11?
No, I don't work at night at all. I work in the morning, and part of the reason I don't work at night is rum. And part of the reason I love Goa is that Old Monk costs 220 rupees, whereas I pay 700 rupees for a bottle in Uttarakhand, so there's no choice for me. But what you would ask, what food goes well with that? I'll always eat chanak and any kind of fish is always my go-to on the menu in that way. But thank you. You made me confess to all sorts of things I shouldn't be confessing. This may be heresy here, but anyway, I've let the cat out of the bag.
If you're a vegetarian, try vindaloo as well.
Vindaloo, okay.
I had one last question there.
Hello. Yeah, yes, okay. Hi, my name is Aarti Mutana Singh. I'm an author who now lives in Goa. My question was actually very fascinating regarding your cobra's gaze. And you said you came across a lot of them in Karnataka. So could you just give us one example of when you were talking about the fear of having, because the word most people use is hypnotic when they're confronted with a cobra. So would you agree with them, and do you have anything similar that you came across?
Just say that again, sorry, I missed the...
No, you were talking about your cobra's gaze.
Yes.
And you had trouble finding cobras, and you finally found them in Karnataka. And I mean, I belong to Karnataka, so I have come across king cobras, and the first word that comes to my mind when I saw one, is hypnotic. You can't take your eyes off. So and you said you had some experience. Would you just give us one tiny experience?
Sure. Yeah, I was able to turn to friends, Ron Whitaker, who I think most of you know as the sort of snake expert, had set up a rainforest research station in Agumbe, in Karnataka. And when I was trying to find my cobras, I turned to him and he said, well, go to Agumbe and you'll find them. Now, I made a couple of trips. In April, I got a call from the head of the Agumbe Rainforest Research Station saying that the king cobras are now breeding. And part of the breeding behavior of king cobras is that the males combat. So when I got to Bombay, I flew straight from Dehradun to Bangalore and then drove up. And almost immediately we were in a village where these two cobras were in combat. And they coil around each other and they push each other's heads down. So it's not violent, but it's a wrestling match for dominance. And then this is their behavior, and whoever dominates, whichever cobra dominates, is then mates with the female who's waiting nearby. So we observed that for about 3.5 hours, watched these cobras in combat. And it was near a village. It was in the forest, but near a village. And the villagers were also watching. And they invited us to come to a puja the next day. They said, we're having a special Nag Devta puja. I don't speak Kannada, but my friends were able to translate. And they said, please come for that. And I said, of course, I'd be very interested in that. So one day I'm watching the cobras doing their breeding behavior. The next day, the village gathers at this sacred grove, Nagavana, there, and they did a puja for the cobra deities that were there. But there was also an oracle who came. And the oracle was then possessed by the Nagadevta. And it was fascinating to watch because he had the flowers of the areca nut palm and he rubbed those all over his face and on his skin so that he had these gold scales all over his body. And then he lay down on the ground and moved like a cobra through the crowd of people that were watching. And then ultimately stood up and then answered questions from the audience there. So to have watched the breeding behavior of these two king cobras one day, and the next day to watch human beings, in a sense, recreating some of that behavior and venerating that behavior was a truly profound experience in that way. Sorry, I kept going there.
Not at all, absolutely not. Thank you so much, Stephen. It's been an extremely fascinating evening. And I think everybody will agree with me that we've touched upon a whole lot of topics, I mean, and also your repertoire is so large and wide. You've written about so many different things, which actually means you're enjoying life. You're taking in whatever you can, and you're not sort of one-dimensional or thinking only about one thing. But whether it's about the mountains, whether it's about the cobras, whether it's about, anything else, it's about your robbery. So I think it's been very, very fascinating. And it's been a very interesting evening. And I'm very, very happy that you accepted the invitation of the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. There's a time crunch, we could actually go on. And we've also discovered that we have many authors here in the audience this evening. So that's a very, positive kind of feeling for us. And we love doing this. I'm really, really grateful to you, for having accepted our invitation and gracing this evening, and also to our talented conversationalist Shruti Juwarkar. To our esteemed audience, thank you for being the heartbeat of this gathering. It is your language of love and constant support that keeps us geared up at all times. Somebody was asking me earlier in the evening over coffee whether we do this quite often. And let me share a little secret. What happens is that Goa is on everybody's radar. And a lot of people, a lot of authors have their little homes in Goa. And because of that, I think we're very privileged, because compared to the other cities, we have many more authors coming here and we can have more interactions. So in that sense, I think we consider ourselves very, very lucky. I would like to gratefully thank our hospitality partner, Cidade de Goa, our media partner Lokmat, and the unwavering support of Ehsaas Women. Prabha Khaitan Foundation promotes cross-cultural understanding and appreciation. This is to support our ongoing efforts to foster unity and appreciation of the rich cultural heritage across India's diverse states. In this context, we are pleased to felicitate the author with a giveaway made in the beautiful Dokra. Dokra is a non-ferrous metal and is beautifully molded by artisans to craft artifacts, accessories, utensils and jewelry. Owing its name to Dokra, Damar tribe of West Bengal, this ancient bell metal craft is practiced in Bengal. I would now like to call upon Ms. Eva Kapoor, the Director of Food and Beverages, Cidade, Goa, to please give the memento to our esteemed author. Thank you so much, Ms. Kapoor. We're really, really grateful to Cidade, Goa, because every time they come up with a new menu, an interesting menu, and also a very topical menu. Like during the monsoon, sometimes it's, hot bhajiyas or whatever, and we're really grateful to you. It really, really keeps us, feeling very grateful. Thank you so much. And I'd like to request everybody that we're giving away copies of the book, which I'm going to request Stephen to personally sign for you. So do take a copy of the book. For those of you who came in late, if you'd like some coffee and snacks, they're still available. And for the rest of you, good night, and we'll definitely see you again soon. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Shruti.